Hello, welcome to the first episode of Gaming Ordtopsy. My name is Mark Ord and I've been playing video games since 1979 and I love them. So much so that I've decided to make a series of videos discussing the games I love and the reasons why. My videos are going to assume that you, dear viewer, will be familiar with the game in question, but if you haven't or have no interest in playing the game, then you should still be able to watch the video and understand the story, characters and follow the action. It's a long video, but my hope is that it turns out to be a nice retrospective and that you enjoy it. I certainly enjoyed making it. It's going to contain a mix of my highlighted playthrough of the title, interviews from the developer, uninterrupted key scenes, and my commentary on aspects of the game. Oh, cute. Oh, it should be noted that this video will have scenes of violence, strong language and some disturbing imagery. That's because this game was rated with an 18 certificate or an M for mature. Anyway, let's get this show started. My first title is Bioshock.
What is the difference between a man and a parasite? A man builds, a parasite asks, where is my share? A man creates, a parasite says, what will the neighbors think? A man invents, a parasite says, watch out or you might tread on the toes of God.
First of all, let's have a little look at the history of Bioshock's creative designer, Ken Levine. Back in 1995, Levine was hired by Looking Glass Studios to work on Thief. Thief was the first in a series of utterly amazing and original stealth games. They had this great steampunk medieval setting and they were phenomenal. I really highly recommend that you check out the series. So 2 years later, Levine founded his own studio, Irrational Games, along with his colleagues Robert Fairmeyer and Jonathan Che. Looking Glass approached Irrational Games with the idea to co-develop a new title, System Shock 2. The game was a hybrid science fiction first-person shooter role-playing game with strong elements of horror. Now, System Shock 2 wasn't a big financial hit, but it was loved by the hardcore PC gamers and critics, and it remains to be a highly influential game which contains many themes which can be found in its spiritual successor, Bioshock. Irrational went on to make Tribe's Vengeance, Freedom Force and SWAT 4 games. Again, all loved by hardcore gamers and critics, but not huge hits for Irrational. It took the release of Bioshock, the first multi-platform title, and a game that they had been working on since 2002, for Irrational to finally hit the big leagues.
They told me, son, you're special. You were born to do great things. You know what? They were right.
So here we are at the start of the game, and what a great opening. I love the attention to detail throughout, like being able to smoke a cigarette in an aeroplane was something I'd completely forgot you could do in the 1960s. And you have this late 50s raffia handbag with pearls spilling out, returning to the ocean. I remember playing this for the first time and thinking it was still a cutscene. The reflection effects of the fire and the water was just so good that it took me a minute to realise I could actually move. It initially struck me as odd that I was the only survivor in this air crash. However, in hindsight, it's eventually explained why. I suppose it directs the narrative somewhat. Levine doesn't have to dilute an already complex story with the excess baggage of having to interact with any other survivors in some way. And then we have this lighthouse in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Of course, it's more than just a lighthouse. It's Alice's rabbit hole, or C.S. Lewis's wardrobe. A doorway to a world so unlike anything above the sea. The first thing that strikes us is the sculpture of Andrew Ryan's face domineering over the player, with his objectivist slogan of "No gods or kings, only man." We see 3 brass symbols denoting the 3 base foundations of Rapture. Okay, so I'm going to pipe down a little now and let Andrew Ryan and Ken Levine explain a little more about Rapture and its creation.
I am Andrew Ryan, and I'm here to ask you a question. Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose Rapture. A city where the artist would not fear the censor, where the scientist would not be bound by petty morality, where the great would not be constrained by the small. And with the sweat of your brow, Rapture can become your city as well.
The lighthouse is all lit up like hellfire. Looks like some kind of plane crash. We're in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. How could it? I don't know. You best get over there. And be quick about it. The splicers are coming. You gotta be kidding. How do you know what's the code? That's the other part of the terrible way now. That means we've got company.
To build a city at the bottom of the sea, insanity. But where else could we be free from the clutching hand of the parasites? Where else could we build an economy that they would not try to control, a society that they would not try to destroy? It was not impossible to build Rapture at the bottom of the sea. It was impossible to build it anywhere else.
City of Rapture was built by Andrew Ryan and his team with a real strong philosophical bent, and that bent was that people, as he says, is a man not entitled to the sweat of his own brow. And he was, he lived in a time in America where he came, first of all, he was born in the Soviet Union, and during around the time of the revolution, or before the revolution, and he saw what happened with the revolution, and he was an anti-communist, and he came to America. He felt that if he was a great man, he should be entitled to the fruit of his own labor. He didn't want the government or the church or anybody else telling him what was or wasn't his, which I think is to an American is a very sort of understandable concept. And he felt so strongly about this that he felt he couldn't stay in America, especially with the coming threat of nuclear war, with the new nuclear weapons after World War II. And he wanted to take what he considered the best and the brightest people to a place where they could practice their craft, whatever their craft was, artist, scientist, industrialist, and do it without another person's hand in their pocket. And that's why he created Rapture.
I saw one of the smugglers having a game of catching on the docks today. And this surprised me because his hands were crippled during the war. He was unloading the barge the other day when he was bitten from the sea slug. He woke up the next morning and he found he could move his fingers for the first time in years. I asked him if he still had that sea slug. As luck would have it, he did.
So we finally get to leave the bathysphere, picking up a shortwave radio on the way, and we come into contact with a guy called Atlas, who ends up being our guide through the city. I love the protest placards strewn about. It immediately tells the player that all is not well in the city under the sea. Now, when I first saw this advert, I was reminded of that famous World War I propaganda poster where a little girl sits on her father's knee and asks, "Daddy, what did you do during the Great War?" Both of these posters are used to manipulate the fathers through the guilt of not disappointing their child. It's a form of peer pressure of them to conform with the rest of the citizens. However, in this case, it's to use the new wonders of these plasmid superpowers instead of joining an army. The theme of parenthood is actually used strongly within this game. It's always struck me as odd that Jack would just reach up for the syringe and use it without any prompts or encouragement from Atlas.
Steady now. Your genetic code is being rewritten. Just hold on and everything will be fine. You alright, Boyle? First time plasmid's a real kick from a mule. But there's nothing like a fistful of lightning now, is there?
What a superb line. Now, this is a lovely section. It's simply there to show off the water effects. Irrational Games hired people specifically for this, and they did a phenomenal job. It's completely scripted, of course. I could stand at the end of that tunnel and I just wouldn't drown, but it gives a nice sense of urgency and hurries the player along to the next section. Now, one of the most standout features that you notice when you step into Rapture is the truly stunning Art Deco design that pervades throughout the game. It was such a unique and refreshing setting, a real change from the gamut of brown-hued sci-fi or military shooters. Sadly, a situation that still hasn't changed. Not only is the design in the large-scale architecture, it's in the smaller details too. It's in the posters, the neon signs, the Bakelite security cameras, doors, furniture. It's this consistency throughout that makes Rapture a really special and believable environment to be in. The art team really do have to be congratulated on the beautiful art assets that they created. Not only did they build this stunning backdrop, they proceeded to destroy it. Slowly we witness the decay that sets in. The effects of the Civil War has destroyed much of the city, and the Atlantic Ocean is slowly reclaiming Rapture. Now we're coming up to a very short but key scene in the game. It's the plight of Atlas, and I find it actually quite moving. And that's mainly due to Gary Scheinman's phenomenal music score and Carl Hanover's strong performance.
Listen, I've got a family. I need to get them out of here. but the splicers have cut me off from them. If you can reach them in Neptune's bounty, then maybe, just maybe... I know you must feel like the unluckiest man in the world right now, but you're the only hope I'll ever see my wife and child again. Go to Neptune's bounty. Find my family, please.
So we finally get our first real weapon in the game, and the developers give it to us in the most creepy way possible by showing us how far gone these splicers really are, with the unfortunate lady in the pram.
Plasmids changed everything. They destroyed our bodies, our minds. We couldn't handle it. Best friends butchering one another. Babies strangled in cribs. The whole city went to hell.
As we enter the Kashmir restaurant, we can see evidence of a bomb, and through the use of the audio diaries we learn that this was the starting point of the Civil War. I love this setting. We've got the ink spots playing in the gramophone, the party streamers and hats strewn about downstairs, and that beautiful poster advertising the Masquerade Ball of 1959. We're coming up to a key scene here, which is the first time we see a Big Daddy in action, with all its utter brutality.
Careful now. Would you kindly lower that weapon for a minute? You think that's a child down there? Don't be fooled. She's a little sister now. Somebody went and turned a sweet baby girl into a monster. Whatever you thought about right and wrong on the surface, well, that don't count for much down in Rapture. Those little sisters, they carry Adam, the genetic material that keeps the wheels of Rapture turning. Everybody wants it, everybody needs it.
Slugs alone are not enough. I'll need money. And one other thing.
Originally we had the whole ecology system, and the gatherers were actually not girls. They were these slugs. These, you know, little slugs that flew around, and if you got near them, they'd roll up and start clicking, and that's when the protector would come in and attack you. And, you know, we had the full animation for those guys were working fine, and you know, you step back and it's like we want to build this relationship between the protectors and the gatherers, and nobody cares about a slug.
It wasn't really much of a choice to whether or not you wanted to harvest them or not. It was just like, that's an ugly sea slug, I want to kill that little
yeah it was like you just wanted to stomp on them. Yeah. They were really nasty, and they just looked like things you squished. But it took us like a long time to find a gatherer that we liked. Yeah. Like we went through, we started getting concepts from everyone internally was working on it, and we even had outsourcing concept artists like throwing their ideas into the mix.
You gotta dig some of those up. There were the little squirrely
yeah
guy.
There was one that was like this little like gerbil man.
There were crabs. There were, you know, going with the whole underwater theme.
There was a consideration they might be monkeys at one point, which that idea didn't last long.
I'll admit it, my bad idea was a dog whose front legs could move, but its back legs were bound in a wheelchair, going around eating stuff. Yeah, that's a bad idea.
there was like this little hunchback Oompa Loompa type of guy, and eventually we started seeing that the more humanoid we got, the better it felt.
Ultimately, it came down to just you don't have sympathy for any of those characters, or you don't want to interact with them.
And then Rob Waters, our in-house concept guy who worked on all of our stuff in recent years, drew this incredibly creepy looking little girl, and that was like, this is the way we've got to go. It's incredibly creepy, and it can be expressive. And one of the biggest problems with the slug back in the time was he had no appendages, he had no face, he had no eyes. Like you
had
just
no lower jaw even.
Yeah, you couldn't even. You had no idea what this thing was trying to communicate to you as a gamer.
Having her evolve from an insect into, you know, another tentacle monster, all the way to this idea that it's these little girls. I think it was just exciting because you're crossing a line there I don't think people expect, and having Ken come up with ideas like that, and these challenging ideas you have to illustrate and sell to an audience, and make it edgy without going over the line. I think that was just rewarding, challenging. Hopefully we've done a good job with that.
Now, the story and environment of Bioshock had evolved wildly since its initial concept. Originally it was about a deprogrammer that had to rescue a politician's daughter from a cult. It was set on a desert island, and within that island was an old World War II Nazi bunker filled with wild genetic experiments. However, Levine was reading the works of Ayn Rand, and this influenced him into writing the final story of Bioshock, with its central theme of objectivism.
What gave you the idea to create Rapture, and why the name Rapture?
Well, the name Rapture is probably Andrew Ryan's little joke. Andrew Ryan is, it has some basis of characters in history, like Howard Hughes, and wealthy industrialist, and Ayn Rand, who is a philosopher, and a noted atheist. And Rapture in religion is a notion of where people will, what happens when the end times come, and all the chosen, the religious chosen are taken up to heaven, and everybody else is left behind. And this is sort of his little joke, that all of his chosen people are taken away from Earth and brought to Rapture, and everybody else is left behind. All the best people, best and the brightest, are brought to Rapture. And so it's sort of an ironic name for him. And so that's where he came up with the name, in my view.
A little history lesson here. Ayn Rand was a philosopher and novelist, with her most notable works of fiction being The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. She created the concept of rational and ethical egoism. Now, Ayn Rand was the type of person that would use 1,000 words to describe something that only really needed 50. But here's a good summary of how she describes objectivism.
The basic principle of objectivism is that man must be guided exclusively by reason. Reason is the faculty that identifies and integrates the material provided by his senses. That's a formal definition. That reason is man's only tool of knowledge, his only guide to action, and his only guide to the choice of values. As a consequence of that, man's proper ethics, or morality, is a morality of rational self-interest, which means that every man has a right to exist for his own sake, and he must not sacrifice himself to others or sacrifice others to himself. That the achievement of his own rational happiness is the highest moral purpose of his life. As a consequence of that, the only political system which expresses this morality is the system of laissez-faire capitalism, by which I mean full, unregulated, uncontrolled.
Now, I've read The Fountainhead, and I'm familiar with Rand's work, and well, this clip sums up my personal feelings on the subject.
Ooh, The Fountainhead! Mom, isn't that book the Bible of right-wing losers?
Yeah, but the guy on the book jacket is one sexy slice of beefcake. Grrr.
Aye, I know it's a cheap shot, but I am a lefty, so there you go. So Levine takes Ayn Rand's objectivist theory and dials it up to 11. It goes to such an extreme level that this once wonderful city is turned into a hellish dystopian society.
Well, as soon as we came up with the idea of utopia, I was always a sucker for failed utopia stories. I mean, are there any real utopia stories? They're always a failed utopia. I mean, when I was a kid, I grew up reading, Brave New World in 1984, and I was obsessed with Logan's Run when I was a kid, which probably dates me.
When Picasso became bored of painting people, he started representing them as cubes and other abstract forms. The world called him a genius. I've spent my entire surgical career creating the same tired shapes over and over again. The upturned nose, the cleft chin, the ample bosom. Wouldn't it be wonderful if I could do with a knife what that old Spaniard did with a brush?
So here we are in the medical pavilion, home to the psychotic Dr. Steinman. We see a poster for the Archivox. Now, the audio diary system is a well-used mechanic in video games, and for good reason. It's an effective way for the writer to impart backstory to the player. However, the use of these large tape diaries, each one with a single personal entry simply lying around Rapture, is a clumsy contrivance. It's never as believable as, say, hacking an email account in a game that has a contemporary or futuristic setting, or indeed simply finding lost pages of a journal. Now, as a doctor, Steinman is supposed to follow the Hippocratic Oath and do no harm to others. Yet, following his objectivist ideals to the extreme, he completely disregards this. Much like the Howard Rourke character in The Fountainhead, his sole objective is his artistic vision. Now, whilst Rourke uses architecture for his artistic vision, Steinman practices in biological art with hideous consequences. Now, I say Steinman's psychotic, but in truth, most of the Rapture citizens have been rendered insane, twisted by too much gene splicing. During World War I, the surgeons in the field of plastic surgery dedicated themselves to the maxillofacial reconstruction of veterans who suffered from head injuries from shell explosions, bullet wounds and mustard gas. This was called Project Facade, and some of the results were quite horrific. It was mostly experimentation with skin grafts and replacing lost noses, jaws and cheekbones with prosthetics. The art team took Project Facade as inspiration for the splicer designs. It's a nice touch that they are ashamed enough to wear masks to conceal their own features, possibly avoiding their own reflections so they don't have to feel so repelled. Okay, so we're coming up to another key scene, and it's one that presents the player with a choice. Do we harvest or save these little sisters? Once a little girl who has turned host to a parasitic sea slug, has changed this child into something quite grotesque. The macabre way that she prods at corpses with her needle, and then sucks the bodily fluids from a rubber baby bottle teat is disturbing. When Atlas and Tenenbaum plead with you to harvest or save these little sisters, it kinda reminds me of those cartoons where you see a character's conscience represented by having a devil on one shoulder and an angel on the other. It's a binary choice that essentially becomes altruistic or objectivist in your actions to these little sisters.
Sounds like another tunnel collapse. Welcome to Rapture, the world's fastest growing toilet joke. It's a little one. Here's your chance to get some Adam.
It's just you and me and all the tasty Adam I can drink.
it's you who will be shot next.
Easy now, Doctor. He's just looking for a wee bit of Adam. Just enough to get by.
I'll not have him hurt my little ones.
It's okay, lad. It's not a child. Not anymore, it ain't. Dr. Tenenbaum saw to that.
Bitte, do not hurt her. Have you no heart?
Aye, that's a pretty sermon coming from the ghoul who cooked up them creatures in the first place. Took fine little girls and turned them into that, didn't you? Listen to me, boyo. You won't survive without the Adam those things are carrying. Are you prepared to trade your life, the lives of my wife and child, for Tenenbaum's little Frankenstein?
Here! There is another one. Use this. Free them from their torment. I will make it to be worth your while. Somehow.
Oh, the way she backs away from the player certainly made me feel uncomfortable the first time I played it. Look, right now we're going to harvest the little sister, and we'll explore the consequences of that later in the video. It's understandable that the developers didn't show anything too graphic here. Showing a representation of a child being killed in any media format for entertainment isn't needed. Nobody wants a media frenzy from the Daily Mail after all.
You did the right thing. Just remember, them things aren't people no more. And it's Dr. Tenenbaum that got the thank for us.
The death penalty and rapture. Council's in an uproar. Riots in the streets, they say. But this is the time for leadership. Action must be taken against the smugglers. Any contact with the surface exposes rapture to the very parasites we fled from. A few stretched necks or a small price to pay for our ordeals.
So, there's no room for religion in objectivism or in rapture, as evidenced by the hung smuggler with his contraband of Bibles and crucifixes. The very nature of rapture being under the sea means that resources will always be limited. So of course it's going to create a divide of the haves and have-nots. Neptune's bounty is a dirty food processing area, and someone's going to have to gut the fish or do the dirty work, while the Ryans and the Tenenbaums of Rapture lead a life of relative comfort. We see that religion starts to take a hold on Rapture, and that Ryan needs to destroy the source of the trouble. Curious that the Sunday school song that's being sung is about a certain power over little girls or little sisters.
Jesus loves me, this I know, for the Bible tells me so. Little ones to him belong. They are weak, but he is strong.
This Fontaine fellow is somebody to watch. Once he was just a menace, to be convicted and hung. But he always manages to be where the evidence isn't. He's the most dangerous type of hoodlum, the kind with vision.
Here, we get our first introduction to Frank Fontaine. He's the head of the smuggling ring and a grifter. It's his men that first discover the sea slug that changes everything. Fontaine funds Tenenbaum's research, giving birth to Fontaine Futuristics. It's also his little sister's orphanage that becomes the front for the selection process of the Adam Gatherers. Now, Fontaine in many ways is an ideal objectivist. He's intelligent, has a keen understanding of the capitalist market, and an extreme level of self-interest. Unlike Ryan, he's also increasingly aware of the class divide in Rapture, to the point where he creates Fontaine's homes for the poor, and will later find out it isn't for any altruistic or good intent. It's interesting that the plasmids can offer an amazing freedom to the citizens, a liberation from the chains of their own DNA. However, Fontaine puts a price on that freedom, with the adamant plasmids becoming the real currency of Rapture. It's ironic that the plasmid leads to a dependency of the citizens to the substance, which in turn enslaves them. Now, through the diaries we learn that Fontaine apparently dies in a gun battle with Ryan's men, and that Ryan takes over the distribution of the plasmids. So, let's go rescue Atlas's family.
You ooze in like an assassin, and then you try to sneak out like a thief. You're no CIA spook. Who are you? Why have you come here? There's two ways to deal with a mystery. Uncover it, or eliminate it.
Get out! Get out and get to Arcadia! Jesus Christ! Moira. Patrick. Ain't that just like Brian? Waits until we're almost out, then he pulls the string. We'll find the bastard. We'll find him and we'll tear his heart out.
Initial deployment, Vita Chamber. Client Orion Industries, Stage 1, age complete. Sinclair and Alexander tried to explain the science to me, but Suchon does not believe them. They keep saying plasmid reconstruction this and quantum entanglement that, and then poof, dead people come back to life. Bullshit! Of course, Ryan will only allow it to be tuned to his genetic frequencies for the testing.
Arcadia is home to this lush, verdant park full of trees. Considering where we are, it's an incongruous setting, but mechanically it has its purpose. Arcadia is the lungs of the city, with the trees providing a breathable air instead of some elaborate air pump system. Now, if I remember my biology classes correctly, a key ingredient to photosynthesis is sunlight, an ingredient that's surely lacking in the bottom of the ocean floor. I guess it's best not to look too closely at these things. Here, Ryan is willing to literally choke the life out of the citizens to stop our progress by poisoning the trees. We're here off on another fetch quest to halt the damage that Ryan's done. Unfortunately, the fetch quests are the heart of Bioshock's mission structure. Fetch the key from Steinman, fetch the camera on Neptune's bounty, fetch the enzyme to counteract the poison. It's a shame that all there is to it is fetch quests, as I'm not particularly fond of them. However, to the game's credit, it never feels like a chore like it does in some MMO games. It always teases the player with more backstory via the audio diaries, or introduces new variants of enemy like the teleporting Houdini splicers.
I could have been the toast of Broadway, the talk of Hollywood, but instead I followed you to this soggy bucket. When you needed my starlight, I illuminated you. But now I rot, waiting for an audience that doesn't ever come. I'm writing something for you, Andrew Ryan. It's a requiem.
That's better. Atlas Ryan. Atlas Ryan. Da 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 da. Time-wise, you could get something decent on the radio. The artist has a duty to seduce the ear and delight the spirit. So say goodbye to those two blowhards, and hello to an evening with Sander Cohen.
So, after saving the trees in Arcadia, we found ourselves trapped in Fort Frolic, the theatre district in Rapture. I love this section. As you enter, the spotlight shines on you and makes you the star, taking centre stage at this part of the story. and we're introduced to Sander Cohen for the first time. Lunatic that he is.
Welcome to Fort Frolic. No need to thank me for jamming the transmissions of those boors, Atlas and Ryan. Let them have their squabble. The artist, yes, the artist knows there is richer earth to till. For example, I test you, little moth, but for a reason. I test all my disciples. Some shine like galaxies, and some burn like a moth at the flame. Come now, into my home.
The lead designer for the Fort Frolic level was Jordan Thomas. Thomas had previously worked with Irrational Games and Lookingglass Studios, with his most notable early work being the Shale Bridge Cradle level in Thief 3, which was genuinely creepy and utterly brilliant. He later became the creative lead designer of Bioshock 2 and is currently reunited with Levine in the production of Bioshock Infinite. One of the many notable aspects of Bioshock is its wonderful use of period music. Here, Thomas briefly explains why the music is such a powerful tool when creating the atmosphere in Rapture.
You also hear that creepy period music, you know, like the sort of tunes of the 40s that were very idealistic, and when you set them up against the kind of nightmare that its people have turned into, the Rapture people, it's very sad, and that makes you think a little bit as each time you fire a shot.
Sander Cohen was one of the founding elite of Rapture. The creation of his character was clearly influenced by real-life artists such as Salvador Dali and the American entertainer George M. Cohan. Sander is a composer, poet, playwright and sculptor. Now, it's his work as a sculptor that impacts the most on the player. His statues are created by murdered splicers set in plaster. Cohen leaves these macabre tableaus dotted around Fort Frolic, and some of which are wonderfully eerie. He's a terrible, terrible poet though.
The Wild Bunny by Sander Cohen. I want to take the ears off, but I can't. I hop. And when I hop, I never get off the ground. It's my curse, my eternal curse. I want to take the ears off, but I can't. It's my curse. It's my fucking curse. I want to take the ears off. Please, take them off. Please.
Presto, presto. No, no.
I'm trying. Please.
Once again, young Fitzpatrick.
Oh God, you sick fuck, let me out of there!
Calm down now. Life.
So the structure here is the same as the rest of the game. It's a fetch quest. Here, Cohen wants you to hunt down and kill 4 of his prodigies and photograph their corpses for his new masterpiece, the Quad Tick. Through the audio diaries, it's intimated that they were all former lovers of his at one point. Like Steinman, Cohen is completely focused on his art and oblivious to any moral cost in creating it. This superb section is when Cohen momentarily turns on the player and creates an ambush of splicers for you to dispatch.
What's that look? You don't like it, do you? I don't need to be judged by you, by anyone. Screw you! Screw all you fucking doubters! Here's what I say to all of you!
Tchaikovsky's Waltz of the Flowers from his Nutcracker Suite plays, and again the spotlight is focused on you. What becomes a simple fight for survival is transformed into this beautiful violent waltz. It's a scene that's reminiscent of Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, and it's highly effective here too.
Smile! Smile!
Throughout the game we occasionally see ghosts. They remind me of Nigel Kneale's phenomenal ghost story, The Stone Tape, inasmuch as these aren't the restless or wronged spirits of the dead, but echoes from a past and a side effect from the plasmid use.
Well, if it isn't the long-lost Andrew Ryan. Come here, Tiger.
Again, like the audio diary system, they're a brilliant way of telling the backstory to the player. Coming up is perhaps the most powerful scene featuring these echoes. We see the fate of Jasmine Jolene, Andrew Ryan's favourite stripper and good time girl.
I thought you had forgotten about poor Jasmine, but I am so glad you didn't. I'm sorry, Mr. Ryan. I didn't know. I didn't know Fontaine had something to do with it. What are you doing? No, don't, please. I loved you. Don't, please,
Again, I'll explain. It means
We can hear how effective the music can be in setting the horror of a scene. Here we have the Andrews sisters singing a jolly tune in a gramophone while we're witness to the aftermath of this brutal murder.
That creepy Dr. Tenenbaum promised me it wasn't going to be a real pregnancy. They just take the egg out once Mr. Ryan and I had... Oh, I needed the money so bad. But I know Mr. Ryan's going to suss it out. Going to know I wasn't being careful. Going to know I sold the... Mr. Ryan's going to be so mad at me.
So, with our mission here finally complete, Cohen sees us off with a farewell befitting of his character. We get a plasmid for our reward though, and we do get a choice of killing him here. It's not recommended, as you can see him again later on at Olympus Heights, where he can grant you the access to a valuable power at the People Weapon Upgrade Station. So, we head off to Hephaestus.
Advanced deployment, Lot 111, Dr. Suchong, client Fontaine Futuristics. Baby is now a year old, weighs 58 pounds, and possesses gross musculature of a fit 19-year-old. The results are disappointing, but within expected tolerances.
Now, if Arcadia were the lungs of the city, then Hephaestus is most definitely the heart. Everything here has a red-coloured hue due to the geothermal vents on the ocean floor. And there's the arterial-like halls branching off into the separate chambers of the power station. It's actually quite fitting as we're heading into the heart of the story and our showdown with Andrew Ryan. But not before we gather some more components to get us on our way. This time, it's to make an EMP bomb, and to be truthful, the reasons to make these items are becoming less and less interesting the more the game goes on. It's a great shame, as it's the story that's now propelling the player forward.
A man builds a city at the bottom of the sea. That's a marvel. Another man happens to be on a plane that crash lands on the same city in the middle of the ocean. Why, that sounds more like a miracle.
Whenever we die in the game, we get resurrected into these mysterious Vita chamber pods. It's a neat use of a checkpoint system and it works well. Many gamers have bemoaned the fact that it's a system that's open to abuse. You can't conceivably go through the game only using the wrench. Gamers complained that this game of attrition got boring, hence the game was boring. But they're wrong. Irrational gives you this wonderful playground where you can set traps, hack the security systems to your favour, and experiment with these plasmid powers. It's simply unfair to dismiss a game because of a player's lack of creative imagination. Throughout, Ryan goads the player, but more interestingly, he gives us glimpses of the truth.
A worm looks up and sees the face of God. But look around. It's a regular convention of worms in here. They all had mothers, fathers, people who loved them. They got married, got their wives. What makes you think you're any different? I haven't chosen the spot for you on the wall yet. Let me know if you have a preference. So far away from your family, from your friends, from everything you ever loved. But for some reason, you like it here. You feel something you can't quite put your finger on. Think about it for a second, and maybe the word will come to you. Nostalgia.
So, here we are, coming up to not only the most pivotal scene in the game, but in my opinion, one of the most memorable in this generation of gaming. We hear that rhythmic pulsing sound resembling the actions of a heart as the tooth is finally revealed.
Did you talk to your puppy? She's very pretty.
Thank you, Papa Sushon.
Break her neck for me. What? Break that sweet puppy's neck. No, please. Break that puppy's neck. Would you kindly? No! No! Very good.
The assassin has overcome my final defense, and now he's come to murder me. In the end, what separates a man from a slave? Money? Power? No. A man chooses. A slave obeys. You think you have memories. A farm. A family. An airplane. A crash. And then this place. Was there really a family? Did that airplane crash? Or was it hijacked? Forced down. Forced down by something less than a man, something bred to sleepwalk through life until they are activated by a simple phrase spoken by their kindly master. Was a man sent to kill, or a slave? A man chooses. A slave obeys. Come in. Stop, would you kindly? Would you kindly? Powerful phrase. Familiar phrase.
Would you kindly? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly find that? Would you kindly find it? Would you kindly find it? Would you kindly get this? Would you kindly head to Ryan's office and kill the son of a bitch?
Sit, would you kindly? Stand, would you kindly? Run, Stop! Turn. A man chooses. A slave obeys.
Again, control is taken away from Jack. This time from Ryan, who decides to die how he sees fit.
Kill!
Underpinning his point that he is the master and you are nothing but a slave. Control is also taken away from us, the player, and it proceeds to defy our expectations of some climactic boss fight, something that we've slavishly come to expect from a game's antagonist.
A slave obeys! Obey!
Hurry now! Grab Ryan's genetic key! Now would you kindly put it in that goddamn machine?
Now, for me, Levine is kinda breaking the fourth wall here and using Ryan to comment on the fact that we gamers will blindly follow what's instructed of us by the game, or in this case the game's unreliable narrator, despite these actions not really making any sense. We see a power up and will blindly use it, but would you really happily inject some unknown substance into your body, or indeed forgo escaping this incredibly hostile environment to go murder a stranger because another stranger asked you to? No, you wouldn't. But a majority of us did in this game without ever thinking. In essence, the gamer is just as much a slave as what Jack is. Anyway, it's time for the real villain's monologue.
It's time to end this little masquerade. There ain't no Atlas kid. Never was. Selling my line of work takes on a variety of aliases. Hell, once I was even a Chinaman for 6 months. But you've been a sport, so I guess I owe you a little honesty. The name's Frank Fonte. I gotta say, I had a lot of business partners in my life, but you, of course, the fact that you were genetically conditioned to bark like a cocker spaniel when I said, would you kindly, might have had something to do with it, but still. Now, as soon as that machine finishes processing the genetic key you just fished off Ryan, I'm gonna run rapture tits to toes. You better, pal. You know what they say? Never mix business with friendship. Thanks for everything, kid. Don't forget to say hi to Ryan for me.
Now, the tool of an unreliable narrator isn't new to games. Indeed, Levine himself has used it previously with System Shock 2, but it's rarely as deftly handled as it is here.
Come with me!
The final part of the game is about Jack and perhaps the gamer establishing their own will for the first time.
One of the children came and sat in my lap. I push her off. I shout, "Get away from me!" I can see the Adam oozing out of the corner of her mouth, is thick and green. Her filthy hair hanging in her face, dirty clothes, and that dead glow in her eye. I feel hatred, like I never felt before. In my chest, bitter, burning fury. I can barely breathe. And suddenly I know. It is not this child I hate.
Welcome back, child. Welcome to the city where you were born.
So we wake up in a safe place after the betrayal of Fontaine, Now of course the clues were always there, the tattooed chains on the wrist symbolising Jack's slavery, the Vita chambers working because Jack has the same DNA sequence as his dad, Ryan, and the Patrick and Moira poster in Fort Frolic, clearly inspiration for Atlas's fictional family. This is a great section of the game as it offers us a little respite from the mad violence that we've endured since the air crash. Seeing the children playing under drawings on the wall is nice, however, it actually instilled a creeping dread within me. Now, much like I've done for this video, the first time I played Bioshock, I harvested every little sister I could find because the game told me it would give me more Adam, more power, and a better chance at survival. I was thinking like a gamer.
Who's he? He's the one who hurts us. Mama Timberbound says stay away from him.
Jesus Christ, that was it. I really couldn't handle that. So when I first played Bioshock and came to this scene, I restarted the game from scratch. It was a simple binary choice, an easy button press, and it was ultimately my choice and actions that resulted in the murder of these children. Yes, it's fictional video game children, but the horror was still there. For the first time ever, a game had really connected with me, and I was utterly appalled by the results of my actions.
Who's he? He's the one who saved me.
So replaying the game results in a simple alteration to the girl's script, but for me it was so worth it. I felt clean. So we're off to Apollo Square, the residential district of Rapture. This is where Fontaine's little sister orphanage and homes for the poor are based. The homeless ultimately turn into Fontaine's foot soldiers in the Revolution under Fontaine's new persona, Atlas. Again, influences to Ayn Rand's work is apparent here, with posters asking who is Atlas, referencing the Who is John Galt posters in her novel Atlas Shrugged. This is a great section as we get to have a wee poke around at where the main characters live, and we see the sad results of the Civil War's impact on the citizens.
Look at my home, torn apart by Fontaine and his pigs. No doubt he had the samples of Lot 192 taken to his penthouse. Entrance is in lobby, but the damn thing is always locked. You will not believe me, but there was a time when this place was also beautiful.
Our mission here is to find the formula that can break Jack's mental conditioning, so we aren't at the mercy of Fontaine's commands. Now, I've been rather hard on the fetch quest system in this game, and it's unfair of me. In Bioshock, the design is really centred to the curiosity of the player. The levels are quite open, and to an extent it grants the player their own agency in the game world. It's tricky to have this exploratory gameplay and still lead the player to the goal. Now, like other games, Bioshock tackles this in different ways. There's a quest arrow that leads you to the destination, something I personally don't use. A map you can consult, and more interestingly, there are visual and audio clues such as changes in lighting, splicer conversations, music, and the passing mentions in audio diaries. Now, too many recent shooters limit the player in what they can do in a game world, to the point where military games like Call of Duty and Medal of Honor take linearity to the point of being an on-rail shooter that punishes the player for their curiosity by killing them for daring to stray off course. Rapture is an amazing environment, and it's wonderful that the game encourages you to go out and explore all the details within its game world. The actual fictional reasons as to why you explore the world may be weak, but it still gives the player the impetus to find that many little visual stories found throughout. As the saying goes, it's more about the journey than the destination. So we eventually enter Fontaine's apartment and we can hear Mario Lanza singing "Oh Danny Boy."
But come ye back when summer's in the meadow.
I like to imagine that the song was inspiration for Fontaine's alter ego Atlas. It encapsulates that salt-of-the-earth, hard-working American-Irish immigrant, an ideal romanticised figure to inspire the disenfranchised citizens into revolution.
These sad saps. They come to Rapture thinking they're gonna be captains of industry. But they all forget that somebody's gotta scrub the toilets. What an angle they gave me. I hand these mugs a cot and a bowl of soup, and they give me their lives. Who needs an army when I got Fontaine's Home for the Poor?
That is step one of turning you into one of those disgusting big daddies. The only way to get through that door Fontaine went through is to have a little one open it for you. And they will only trust you if you look like, sound like, and even smell like one of those big stinking brutes.
There's something mournful and so dreadfully sad about these big daddies. It's partly to do with their haunting whale-like moans and the pathetic way they just stomp around looking for their little companions. It's also because the creations of these rubber-suited golems is just so abhorrent. Criminals or unfortunates that have crossed Ryan have been genetically modified into these hulking automatons. Skin and organs grafted to the suit, vocal cords cut, lobotomized to remove any rational thought, and mentally conditioned to protect these little sisters. The background into the creation of Big Daddies and the protective bond is fully explored in more detail in Bioshock 2 to brilliant effect, and that's a game I'll have a look at in a later episode of Gaming Ordtopsy. Now, some friends of mine get a little freaked out by Bioshock, disturbed by its atmosphere and the admittedly occasional jump scare. Some even consider it a horror game like the Dead Space or Resident Evil games. Now, I've never felt like that about Bioshock, but that's not to say I haven't felt horrified while playing the game. As I said earlier, I was repelled by my actions to these little sisters. And another horror for me is when I first saw these cells in the orphanage, which had been turned into Skinner boxes. I guess it's the horror of science without conscience. It's really akin to the atrocities that the Nazis committed during the Holocaust. In this case, it's to determine if the emotion of love is a trained behaviour, and then to train these girls into loving the big daddies by giving them electric shocks if they press the wrong button. Now, Sushong and Tenenbaum are interesting characters and are both very similar to one another. Tenenbaum was a Jewish prisoner in Auschwitz as a teenager. She witnessed firsthand the experiments the Nazi scientists did to the prisoners, and was so irritated by their scientific errors that she not only corrected them, she ultimately helped the Nazis. A hell of a way to survive the camp. And we have Sushong, completely detached from any compassionate emotion, a sociopathic scientist who has no issues in performing mental and physical experiments on children, including Jack. It's ultimately guilt that makes Tenenbaum realise the damage that her experiments have done to these girls, mixed with a possible guilt from the death camp. And she seeks redemption by trying to fix her mistakes. Sushong never achieves this though. Since Frankenstein, it's been a well-used tradition in fiction that the scientist's creation turn on its creator, and the same thing happens to Sushong, and rather satisfying it is too.
Clinical trial protector system, plasmid lot 255, Dr. Suchong, client Ryan Industries. Very frustrating day. I can't seem to get the damn big daddies to imprint on the little brats. The protection bond is just not forming.
Papa Suchong?
Get away. maybe if I modify the genetic sequence to... Shush! The sequence to allow for... Get away, you filthy little shit! What? What are you doing? Get back! Get back!
Here we take on the role of a big daddy and protect the little sister while she collects Adam. In truth, the first time I played this, I thought another double cross would happen, and instead of defeating Fontaine, I would be turned into a big daddy forever and just stomp around Rapture as one of them. It's a rather downbeat ending, sure, but it's probably better than what's actually coming up. So, Jack is in full control of his mental faculties, and we want vengeance. Unfortunately for us, it also means that Bioshock takes us to familiar territory, the final boss fight, and it's an awful one at that.
Go! Go now!
Fontaine has now consumed so much Adam that he now ironically enough resembles the bronze statue of Atlas, the Greek titan. Throughout, the game has defied our expectations as gamers and has been all the better for it. This definitely weakens the whole experience. Anyway, we'll see the good ending first, which I actually really like. It deals with family, and it fits in with Jack's story. Jack's family and his memories of them were never real, however his loss would still be profound. It makes sense for him to build a real family. And we'll also see the evil ending, which I think is just rubbish.
I sent you topside. I called you back, showed you what you was capable of. Even that life you thought you had, that was something I dreamed up and had tattooed inside your head. Now, if you don't call that family, I don't know what is. And now,
They offered you this city. And you refused it. And what did you do instead? What I've come to expect of you. You saved them. You gave them the one thing that was stolen from them. A chance. A chance to learn. To find love. To live. And in the end, what was your reward? You never said. But I think I know. A family. They offered you everything, yes. And in return, you gave them what I have come to expect of you. Brutality. You took what you wanted. All the Adam, all the power. And the Rapture trembled. But in the end, even the Rapture was not enough for you. Your father was terrified the world would try to steal the secrets of his city. But not you, for now you have stolen the terrible secrets of the world.
Oh, that evil ending is rubbish. It just makes no sense really, as there's simply been no intimation that Jack would covet any nuclear power and use it. So, that was Bioshock. It isn't a masterpiece, and that's partly to do with the boss fight. Also, the combat can be very loose and chaotic, which some hate. Now, I personally like the messy combat as it gives the player room to improvise and to be creative on the fly during a firefight. And then there's this hacking pipe mania type of minigame. It's actually fun at first, but really wearisome the further you progress. But damn, Bioshock is special. It's a brave game, and so very, very often quite brilliant. The ideas and characters are above anything you normally see in video games. The sequel was announced with Jordan Thomas taking over directing duties. It took place in 1968, set within an even more dilapidated Rapture, with the player taking on the role of a Big Daddy, facing Sophia Lamb, a woman who takes altruism to extreme and dangerous levels. It's brilliant.
And when the darkness comes, let it inside you. Your darkness is shining.
Levine hasn't released a game since Bioshock over 5 years ago, so when they announced a new game, many were surprised that it would be a new Bioshock. This time we go back in time to 1912, and instead of visiting a city under the sea, we visit a city in the clouds, Columbia. The game promises to explore American exceptionalism, religion and eugenics, and I can't wait. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the first episode of Gaming Ordtopsy, and I trust you'll tune in again. Bye bye.
Blood get to know me, all out of my secrets. All my enemies are turning into my teachers. Because light's blinding, no way dividing what's yours or mine when everything's shining.